Welcome to the October 10th Arborist call. Meeting agenda follows a fairly standard format. Quick intro, we do node updates from Zcashd to Zcashd, and then we have a kind of a discussion period where we spend the bulk of our time. Today we're going to talk specifically about ZIP 317 in that time period, and then we'll also have some time left for just open discussion on any topic anyone wants to bring up. And then we encourage like comments or questions at any point, so you don't have to wait to the end of the call or anything like that. For those that may not know, Arborist calls, the goal is to just make protocol development more accessible to the community. Not sure what happened to my screen, but I'm gonna try to get it back. There we go. To make protocol development more accessible, people can obviously join these calls and watch the recordings. If there's something someone would like to see presented, you can just reach out to me, or if you'd like to present something related to protocol development, we'd love to have you. Just let me know, we'll get you slotted in. We have these every 2 weeks, so it's pretty easy to get those worked in now. Other ways to get involved, we have a great community grants program, zcashcommunitygrants.org. We have a Filecoin and ECC grant program for grants that kind of benefit both projects. Happy to say that we just funded our first grant under that program with the Xerox Park folks, who conducted a phenomenal like Halo 2 learning group back in the summer. And they want to continue that work, so they applied for a small grant to continue running those development of Halo 2 learning materials and support for projects building on Halo 2. So pretty excited about that. And then we have of course, our R&D Discord is, kind of where we do like, not just protocol collaboration, but, as the name implies, collaboration on all fronts as it relates to Zcash and engineering and development. So. Okay, with that, we'll kind of shift over. Just quick update on Zcashd.
Yep. Hi, I'm Deirdre from the Zcash Foundation. Quick stuff from Zebra. We are prepping dotting our I's and crossing our T's for our release candidate tagging, which will be sent off for a security audit and conformance audit with the Zcash spec when we tag it. And lots of dependency updates, lots of tweaks to our CI, because we are still dealing with big woo with that. Like yes. we're filing down all the things and like getting our how we want to manage ongoing work, because we still have a ton of ongoing work that we're working on, including the upcoming get block template support and better RPC support for being a Lightwall-D backend. And part of the work that's been happening in the past 2 weeks is making commitment of blocks to our state, not make calls to RPC methods or hang for several minutes or more when there are these big blocks that we're seeing on mainnet right now. So lot of little things like dependency updates and making tests nicer and things like that. And also like state work. So writing non-finalized blocks in a separate thread and trying to parallelize that so that we can, one, tag a release candidate, but then for the future RPC work for get block template and for supporting Lightwall-D front ends, they can make lots of queries to Zcashd over the RPC, and it will be very responsive, and it won't be like hanging or locking or lagging or anything like that. Yeah, and that's basically it.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you very much. And congratulations, by the way.
Don't congrats us yet. We haven't tagged it yet. But we're getting there.
But it's close. It's so close.
It's very close.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so Zcashd update. We have been focused largely on performance scalability improvements. The current top of our stack is a faster sync capability for our mobile SDKs. Now, as I mentioned ad nauseum at the beginning of these calls, the call is about protocol development. So people might think, what are you talking about mobile SDKs for? But this is kind of an all hands on deck kind of effort for us. So we've got a number of members of the core team working on this, as well as our mobile team, of course. And so that's our top of our stack priority wise. We're getting very close on that. and we'll roll out these updates to faster sync in at least a couple of SDK updates. But it's great work going on, and we're pretty excited to get that in the field. It's going to be a pretty significant improvement, even over sync times from our mobile SDKs prior to this increased load that we're seeing. So it'll be an improvement even over, the steady state as it was back, prior to mid-June. So we've also been, kind of post 5.2.0, and there'll be multiple things in 5.3.0, but kind of the focus for 5.3.0 is going to be like around memory optimizations for concurrent memory usage, and it's kind of some of the same thing, like you're processing these larger blocks. We made some changes to do some things in parallel, which then allowed us to exploit more resources on the system, which drove up concurrent memory utilization, and it kind of highlighted some areas we could make improvements. So we've made multiple improvements there, and we've also, community members would hit the random out of memory situation. So if you're running, once 5.3.0 is out with our optimizations, if you're running 5.3.0, and you have the recommended memory configuration on your machine, then OOM should essentially be eliminated at that point. So great work from a number of team members on that as well. We're also making progress on Halo 2 recursion on 3 parallel tracks, basically. One is the front-end API. Second one is back-end split accumulation. And then the third area is circuit changes for full width scalar multiplication. So making some good progress on that front. And then we've, as far as ZIPS 3.17 goes, which we'll talk about more here in a moment, we've kind of, we've done a really exhaustive analysis of historical fee profiles or transaction profiles, if you will. Anything with fees, you have to be very careful that you don't inadvertently detonate a lot of very common use cases, and you really think through the impact of anything that modifies fees in any way that could, impact, let's call it just normal usage of Zcash. So we've done that. We'll talk more about that, but we've begun doing some implementation work around that. And one of the things that implementation involves is kind of an abstraction that we're adding in, to essentially make it where we can adjust fees in the future, even if we did something down the road, that's more close to an EIP 1559 type fee mechanism. Then we would have, some abstractions in place that would make those type changes easier as well. So questions about Zcashd before I move on to ZIP 3.17 from anyone? All right. So ZIP 3.17. So I'll pause here. A huge thank you to everyone that's worked on this. Addie wrote the zip up. Chris and Dara, excuse me, originally kind of came up with the rough model. I think talked to Addie at ZCon 3 about it. Addie took the initiative, wrote up the zip. Nate's been doing a ton of research into the mechanism and different parameters, and we've just again done a ton of analysis. Greg, who's one of our pretty new engineers on the core team, joined right at ZCon 3. Actually, I think a number of you met him. Just did a great job cranking through and creating a bunch of analysis scripts for us, so we could really, instead of wondering, well, what does an average transaction look like, or how many of this type are there, how many of that type are there, he wrote the tools that allowed us to definitively know, which was pretty critical for us in getting to a point where we were comfortable with a set of parameters. So, and then I know that, a ton of people have been involved in tweaking the zip. Deirdre from Foundation, zip editor, and I just see those updates to ZIP 3.17 come through. So everybody that's participated in getting working on that, really just a huge shout out and a thank you to everyone. So okay, so specifically on ZIP 3.17, the parameter selection is what I kind of titled the slide, but the calculus kind of works like this. So there's two things. One is let's define a metric called logical actions, and logical actions for a transaction would be the max of transparent inputs and outputs plus 2 times route join splits plus the max of sapling inputs, sapling outputs, plus orchard actions. Now, so kind of what does that mean? For a typical, let's just say 2 in, 2 out sapling transaction, which we've always kind of used as like, hey, let's use that as kind of a logical baseline. In that case, you'd have 2 logical actions. So it'd be the max of 2 inputs, 2 outputs, or 2. So that's kind of where that comes out. The parameters, marginal fee and grace actions that you see here in the formula, where we have modeled fees and where we're comfortable with the way the math works, the marginal fee value would be 5,000 Zats and grace actions 2. Now, the next slide has some examples of like, oh, well, what about 1 in, 8 out, or 8 logical actions or whatever. So it's much easier to see with real world examples. Like one key point here, and I'll actually go to the next slide, is in Strat, I couldn't get the double lines in here. I didn't have enough cycles to get the double lines, but I explained. So if we look at like a 2 logical action transaction, and again, that could be, transparent, sprout, sapling, or orchard, 2 logical actions, the fees that someone would pay would be 10,000 Zats, which if you've been around Zcash long enough, you know that is the standard fee prior to the ZIP 313 change, which lowered, the standard or conventional fee to 1,000 Zats. So that's kind of resetting it to pre-ZIP 313 levels for kind of like, the default fee or conventional fee, or however you'd like to word it. So, so just explaining the table a little bit again. And Chris got a hand up. Let me get this top part out of the way, Chris, then I'll turn it over to you. Again, grace window size of 2, which means you kind of get 2 logical actions before additional, fee calculations kick in. And for the calculations here that are translated into dollars, it's just, a random ZEC price of 60, just to have something to do some modeling with. So, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to actually to provide a little bit of color on motivations that, just high level motivations behind the design choices. One of the, I think one of the 2 driving motivations that we had here was, first, we wanted the fees to be proportional to the load imposed on the chain, so that someone who makes a 1,000 output transaction and someone who makes a 2 output transaction, that both of them, that you can make 1,000 output transaction, but that you're paying a cost proportional to the load that you impose on the ecosystem. The other thing that we wanted, and this, there's a lot of more detail in the ZIP 317 draft itself, but we wanted to make sure that the fee mechanism that we chose didn't discriminate against any of the protocols. It didn't discriminate against transparent, didn't discriminate against sapling, and didn't discriminate against orchard. And so the logical actions notion that that we showed on the previous slide, the reason for that model is really that we do not want orchard to be at a disadvantage compared to the other protocols. And so the logical actions model basically gives us a level playing field between all of the various protocols that are active today. So that was it. I just wanted to add that.
Yep. Okay. All right. Yep. Excellent point. So yes, key is that it didn't we tried to really think through second order effects, which is, exactly what Chris just said with regard to like pool preference. Like, so you couldn't look at a fee mechanism and go, oh, wow, I can just kind of circumvent that, or I can pay cheaper fees if I move all my funds to the transparent pool and do things there and then move it back, or if I use Sprout versus Orchard or whatever. So we tried to make kind of a level playing field with that. And then the other thing we tried to do was, and we did actually, the kind of the math is not gameable per se. So if you've got, let's just say logical actions of 8, you're going to pay the same cumulative fee if that's one transaction with 8 logical actions or 2 transactions with 4 logical actions. So there would be no way to kind of game it and go, oh, I'll just send, instead of my one transaction with a lot of outputs, I'll just send a lot of transactions with 1 output. And, so the math works out to be identical in those cases, which, we were after as well. So just kind of looking at a couple of examples here. Again, standard 2 action logical action transaction would pay the zip fee level prior to zip 313. And then here's a couple of examples of like 4 logical actions or 8 logical actions and what those fees would be. The interesting one is, there's 1,152 blocks per day roughly. So if you assume, okay, hey, I'm sending a transaction every 75 seconds and I'm just so perfectly lucky that I get 1 in each block, and there's going to be 1,152 transactions with 2 logical actions per day, what would I pay? I'd pay $6.91. What would I have paid prior to, kind of this modification? Well, 69 cents. That's, and then, you can kind of see the math there. So it's 4 logical actions. I'd pay $13 a month for 1,100 transactions and 27 in the case of 8 logical actions. Now, the last line, you're like, wow, you went 248, 1102. That's really a weird progression. The 1102, so this last line is kind of based on actuals. So what I asked Greg to do was just pick kind of a random week in, when, these sandblasting transactions are prevalent, and pick a random week and tell me like, okay, how many transactions are a day, kind of fit that model. And we just roughly based it on, okay, things with greater than 300 outputs, just to kind of have a number. Now, obviously that's, accurate plus or minus some percentage factor, but close enough, I think. So there was 704 sandblasting transactions per day on average. And of those 704, the average number of logical actions was 1102. Right. So this is based on like a week's worth of actual data and analysis. So if this fee structure were in place during that, that average period of time, the old fees that would have been paid would have been 42 cents. Right? Because it's, again, not 1 per block. So that's why it's a little less. But the under the new fee mechanism, then you'd be paying, roughly 2,300 per day for that same usage. So you can see that it's a significant increase over what it was previously. But to Chris's point, this transaction obviously is using a lot more, let's just call it network resources than these other much smaller transactions. Now, the math on that, which everyone can do here themselves, if this were to happen like every day, which we have seen that, these sandblasting transactions go on for weeks and weeks, then your cost per month is roughly, whatever, 69,000 versus like $12, right? So again, this is meant to make fees proportional to usage for the most part. Oh yes, happy to. Didn't see Merrick hop in there, but I'll get Merrick promoted there. Let's see. There we go. Should be rejoining momentarily. But anyway, so that's kind of the flyby on fees. So Nate, it looks like Nate's got a hand up.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, first I wanted to step back to provide really broad context in case people are watching like recordings of this, and then talk a little bit about use cases and roadmap. The broad context is, why are we changing fees? Chris already sort of alluded to it. We want to make sure that users are paying based on the cost they're imposing on the network. And so generally, like during this latest period with these performance issues, one thing we've been doing is like improving the performance, but that doesn't actually necessarily reduce like over usage of the network. So fees are the only way to do that plausibly, in my opinion. So that's like the big picture of why are we changing fees. The second topic was use cases. So this change impacts use cases that use more inputs or outputs. And we've brainstormed some of those, but there may be some that we're not aware of. So it's really important as we're deploying this to do our best to learn from different users of different use cases if this is a problem for them. So some use cases that pop immediately to mind would be cases where you're like paying many recipients, so that might be mining pools, or cases where you're receiving many incoming payments, so those would be inputs. So that could also be mining pools, or that could be, like people taking donations or things of that nature, or small businesses. Another really concrete example is dev fund orgs. They receive one transfer in each block as part of the consensus rules. So this raises their fees for like receiving those funds notably. So I did a back of the envelope calculation, and I think it works out to something like $200 per month. So that's something that you'll be aware of. Yeah, so this seemed like changing fees in this way seems necessary for the network to remain sustainable, and it will impact use cases that use a lot of inputs or outputs, and we should keep our eyes wide open for that. And then the third piece was sort of roadmap, and I kind of see this as like a first step in improving fees, but I think we should follow it up with more improvements. So the main flaw that I see that this has is it just has kind of these hard-coded parameters for the amount of fees, and we're not sure if like that's the right level for a given amount of usage, especially as time develops and there's new users or new use cases, and they'll have different demand for making transactions. So down the road, after this is deployed, I'm pretty keen on doing something like EIP 1559, although there could be other options like a Bitcoin style fee market or whatever. But the general goal is to have fees adjust dynamically with the actual demand and usage of the network in a way that removes discretion from like developers, because I want to get out of the business of every year or every couple of months or whatever developers like pick fee schedules on a table. That's a really bad business to be in, and we should get out of it. So that's sort of how I'm thinking about the longer term roadmap. Zooming back to the very short term, I think we should, since these are the parameters we propose, we should be reaching out to wallet developers like as soon as possible. So I think like today, I want to see if I can get all of these shielded wallet developers into, and maybe even other wallet developers, into a call to just sort of explain this to them and ask if it makes sense to them and if they have concerns about implementing it or things of that nature. And this is also predicated on the idea that wallets can roll out using these fees before the network begins enforcing that these fees are required. So we want to get the wallets to start doing that as quickly as possible so that we can learn if there's any deployment issues or issues with users of those wallets versus other wallets, so on and so forth. So yeah, that's a tour of the roadmap.
Right. And another, kind of another key point is all Greg's great analysis that he's done to kind of help us, help us make a good informed decision on some of these parameters. We can use as, to kind of see progression in, how that rollout that Nate was referring to is actually going. So we can look at, okay, what transactions are we seeing? What are the fees associated with the transaction? are they, are they what we're kind of proposing they should be, or, are they still kind of the default? And then we can kind of gauge how well that kind of rollout across ecosystems going. So, yep, Nate, go ahead.
Yeah, one more. This is sort of a tangent, but I really would like to have wallet developers attend this meeting regularly.
Yeah.
So I see Audie from Nighthawk show up a lot, and that's great.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But like in my opinion, protocol development really requires like wallet developers to be participating, because the whole purpose of the protocol is to enable wallets. So
Right.
I'm gonna try to encourage them to show up more if they can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nope, that'd be great. Okay. All right. That was my last prepared slide. So I'll stop sharing so I can see everyone a little bit better. And that was, so any questions about Zip 317 or any of the node updates or anything? And I know Deirdre has to drop like 3 minutes ago. So, but again, I think the most folks on the call actually today are pretty well informed about everything we just discussed anyway. But go ahead, Nate. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm not as familiar with the Zip, the like life cycle of Zips as I wish I were. So I was of the opinion of reaching out to wallet developers right away and just pointing them at whichever pull request or draft seems the most relevant to me, without necessarily waiting for the official Zip status to reach any particular stage. Is that the right thing to do, or?
Yes. And
Dara, you're really quiet. I can't hear you.
Is Dara speaking?
Nope, still really quiet.
How's that?
Oh, much better.
Yeah, better. So yes, that is the right thing to do. In this particular case, I think the zip can be published sort of pretty much today anyway. So you might be able to just refer to that in the published form.
Okay.
But remember that zips are not like RFCs, so they can be updated. It's not a heavyweight errata process to do corrections to them, so they can be published in draft form and finalized later. That's what will happen here.
Can you remind me of the life cycle or the maturity stages and what those indicate?
Yeah. So the simple case for a zip like this, which is a wallet and standards track, is it starts off as a pull request, and during that period there will usually be a stub page on where the zip is going to be in on zips.zcash, and then the PR is merged, and it's normally merged as a draft. So it will stay in draft for some period, get comments on it, and then it'll go to either active or final. So active would be for something that it is not implemented, and that's then, so the final status is for something that has a one-shot implementation, and after it's done, that's it doesn't need to be changed again. So active is for something that is more dynamic and could be changed in the future.
Okay, so should this zip enter the active state, or is it draft?
It should enter the active state when it has been implemented by at least one wallet.
Okay, thanks.
All right, very good. All right, anything else from anyone? We will wrap it up and let everyone have some time back, because I know everyone can use it for sure. So, all right, thanks very much. Have a great weekend, everyone. Great Friday, great weekend, and yeah, we'll catch up in Discord.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.